So I work as the Environment Compliance Officer, now a manager actually, for Lambeth Parks and Open Spaces, and I'm technically their borough ecologist. About bats, there's plenty that we don't know about bats. So the first caveat is not everything is known about bats, because the problem is they don't talk to us and tell us what they know. But there's also lots of misconceptions and misunderstandings about them, and I'll try and tackle some of them. But really this is about what do we know about bats on or using places in London. That's including Wandsworth Park. Well, a bit of background. Bats, they're mammals. They're just like us. So in other words, they have hair and fur on their bodies. So that's a pipistrelle bat, which is one of the commonest bats in Britain and in London. They're warm-blooded like us, so they have about a body temperature that's above ambient temperatures. They give birth to live-born young, and just like us, they feed on milk. So they're just like us. They're mammals just like us. But the big thing about bats, which you may have noticed if you've gone bat walks, is they're not running around on the ground or on bicycles. They are true free-flying mammals. They are flying. Now, you might have heard of other flying mammals in the world. The famous ones are the flying squirrels. There's one on the right. They're marsupials as well that fly as well. But they're not true flying. They're gliders. They've got flaps of skin on their arms, and you can see there from the flying squirrel, and they launch themselves off trees and they glide down to the ground, mainly to get away from predators or to find new trees to find food on. So they can't fly with true flight. They can't support flight. They glide. The trick about why bats do this is their wing, and it's a remarkable construction. I've got a couple of slides about them. So the first thing you'll notice, if you look at the slide, you can pretty well see that is a modified hand. So if you look at your hand and your arm, and just imagine over millions of years, your hand and arm have evolved into a wing. All the same characteristics of our hand and arm are there in a bat's wing. It's very similar to the human hand and arm. They have all the same bones we have. And you can even see there a tiny little thumb. That's the thumb of what we have, our thumb. That's the thumb in the bat's wing. But what the bats have done is the skin between our fingers has been stretched or extended between very long finger bones. The finger bones have got longer, and the skin that's normally between our fingers is just stretched to cover the whole of the gap between the fingers. And also attached to the body, forming this very thin membrane, very tough, very flexible membrane. And you can see that the wing and the arm contains all the tendons and muscles that we have. But what the bats do, of course, is they're using not their tendons and muscles to power their arms, to lift them, to hold things in their hands. They're using them to power the flight. The bat's wing enables a bat to move and manipulate these fingers and wings as it's flying. So if you ever watch a bat flying, birds tend to be quite linear flight. They tend to fly like this, like that, very straight flights. They do move around, but they're mainly in one direction. Because they can move their fingers and their digits so quickly when they're flying, it means they've got the ability to not only just power themselves through the air, but they can rapidly change course. They can drop, they can rise, they can turn around. Ever seen a bat in the garden? You've seen on the bat walks. There's like little black things zipping around, doing acrobatics, almost tumbling on themselves as they're catching food. And that's because that wing is so maneuverable, very, very flexible. And that gives the bats enormous agility in skill, in navigating through what is a three-dimensional world. They're not on the ground, they're flying in the air. Their world is 3 dimensions. We're a 2-dimensional creature, we're on the ground. Bats are 3D. And also not only finding the food, but also to avoid being caught and eaten themselves. So they're incredibly agile. And you can see there, the bat there is flying, and that was just the image of an insect. Because the bat is flying so quickly, you can't see the insect. But that bat is homing in on its food, using its wings to fly to catch the food. Now, where are bats found? Well, we're talking about British bats, but bats are found all over the world, not just in Britain. The only places they're not found are Antarctica and the Arctic. It's simply too cold for them. There's over 1,400 species worldwide, but we think that is a gross underestimation, because quite simply, we haven't been to all parts of the world thoroughly enough to identify all the animals that are there. You may have seen on the news over the last few years, in places like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, they keep finding more and more mammals every year that have never been found before. So there's probably an underestimation. It's probably 2,000 if we're lucky. Some are large and unusual bats. The flying foxes or the fruit bats, those who have been to the tropics, places like, you know, the Africa or say, Asia, will have seen trees covered in these huge flying bats called the flying foxes. And there's one on the left flying. They're very large. They're frugivores, which is the Latin term for eating fruit and vegetables. Others bats, of course, we know are very specialised. And the famous one that I always get asked on bat walks by kids is vampire bats. The vampire bats drink blood. They are designed to cut into the skin and they cause the skin to bleed, and the blood flows from that wound and they can drink it. They can lick it up with their tongue. They're adapted. They aren't found in Britain yet. But as climate change and things get warmer, we don't know. They're actually found in Central America, which is a long way to travel. But as you all know about modern transport, things are moving around the world very quickly. Spiders is a good example, found in fruit crates. So who knows, a vampire bat sitting in a ship somewhere going, I fancy a trip to Britain. It's probably too cold for them. But bats eat very versatile diets. I mean, vampire bats, we talked about drinking animal and human food. They actually will only choose humans as a last resort. They don't particularly like our blood. It doesn't taste perfect. Which is good because vampire bats are one of the major causes of rabies in Central America. They carry rabies. So really, we don't want them to be eating us. Fruit bats feed on fruit and veg. Bats are also incredibly important. They feed on nectar and pollen from flowers. So there are pollinator bats. Bats often feed on small fish. Some bats feed on small amphibians like frogs and toads. There's even bats who eat other bats. That's a bat on the left there, which actually specially predates on frogs and toads in the tropics. On the right there is a bat pollinating a flower. There are some bats who actually are devoted to drinking the nectar from flowers because they need the sugar to fly. Those of you who like tequila, or like it, or maybe you've got family like it, be grateful for bats. Because the agave plant, which is the plant that produces the liquor that they make into tequila, is pollinated by a bat. So if you like your tequila, be thankful for bats. There are no bats that pollinate sambuca. Most bats, however, worldwide are insectivores. They feed on insects and invertebrates. They are dedicated to hunting and catching insects. All the UK bats we know of are insect eaters. There are no vampire bats, there's no fruit-eating bats, there's no pollinating bats in this country. Mainly because our climate isn't warm enough to support these bats through the year. Plants, of course, as you know, go into hibernation in the winter. Trees drop their leaves. And, of course, there aren't enough fruit around in the winter. So these bats probably won't survive. So insects are probably a better choice for British bats. They eat a wide range of flying prey like beetles, moths, midges, mosquitoes and flies. And they do say that a single bat can, in the right circumstance, eat up to 3,000 midges on a single night. Mosquitoes as well. And there's a bat with an insect in its mouth. If you've got a mosquito problem, thank a bat. Because if the bats come round, they'll devastate the mosquito populations. In some parts of the world, bats are really important controlling insect pests. There's many parts of Europe and Asia where bats are critical in controlling insects that can spread diseases, including to humans. So the bats do have a very key role to play in helping our health. In Britain, how many species of bats do we have? Well, we've got 1,400 species across the world. But in Britain, we've only got about 18 different species of bat recorded. We think only 17 currently breed here, but this might change as it gets warmer. And some bat species are very rare. I mean, these are the long-eared bats. This is a grey long-eared bat, which is quite rare in Britain and it's not found in London. Where on the left there, that is a Dorbenton's bat, which is incredibly common in London. So some are very common, some are very rare. London, it's probably got about 12 species of bat compared to the 18 in the country. Now, the ones you're going to find in a place like Wandsworth Park, the commonest bats, the ones you're going to find all the time, and are probably even out now because it's still warm enough for them, are the pipistrelles. It's an Italian term. It just means little bat or little mouse, pipistrella. And the pipistrelles are our smallest bats, and their weight is quite amazing. You think of a bat, you think it's going to be bulky and chunky. but they weigh between 4 and 7 grams, which is about the weight of a pound coin, which is not a lot. But you think about it, if you're going to fly, you don't want to be big, fat and heavy. You want to be light. And the wingspan's about 25 centimetres, which is about that. So they're not very big. But the thing is, at night, when you're doing bat walks, they look huge because you can't get used to perceptions of dimensions at night. You think they look enormous. When I go on bat walks, kids think they're massive, but they're actually quite small. We've got 3 separate species of pipistrelles in this country. We've got the common pipistrelle, we've got the soprano, because they sing slightly higher, and there's a bat called the Nethusius pipistrelle, which I'll mention in a minute, which is the 3rd pipistrelle. So you've got 3 species of pipistrelle. And it wouldn't surprise me if all 3 used that park at one time. Pipistrelles, if you're looking for them, they're very cosmopolitan. They are very adapted to cities like London. They're really tolerant of lighting. They don't mind artificial lighting as long as it's not intense, as long as it's not flickering, as long as it's not always in their eyes. So they will tolerate artificial lighting and noise as well. They're quite tolerant of noise. They're the most abundant bat species in urban settings, like, for instance, parks, gardens and streets. And the way to tell them is when you're looking for them, they've got a very jerky, erratic and low-level flying. So something like this. They're zipping in and out all the time, wiggling in and out all the vegetation, looking for insects, skimming all the vegetation. And sometimes they come really low. They come right down, almost down to your waist height while they're hunting insects. And they'll completely ignore you, just fly around you, and doing this kind of erratic, crazy flight. And that's what people see in their gardens, these crazy little things zipping around and doing acrobatics. It's 10 will get you one, it's pipistrelle. They're very common. So look out for that kind of really weird flight. If you're sitting in your garden at night and you're seeing a little thing doing this kind of flitting around the vegetation, it's probably pipistrelle. Now, I mentioned this other pipistrelle called Nethusius pipistrelle, the 3rd one. Interestingly, that's a new arrival to this country. It was once a migrant visitor to the UK, so it came over here, crossing the channel, which is quite impressive for a bat, and they would stay here during the summer, hang around, and then disappear again, because in the winter it was quite cold in Britain, so they went back to Europe in order to, to continue survival. It's still rare compared to pipistrelles, but we now think it's resident in many parts of Britain. Over time, the pipistrelle is adapted to Britain's climate, and it seems to be breeding in the UK now, with some very good populations in London. The Bat Conservation Trust some years ago did a big trapping exercise for pipistrelles, and they have these things called harp traps, which are like long strings that hang down, almost like a giant harp. And the bats fly through the strings and get caught, and then they just pick them off. And they were finding Nethusius pipistrelles left, right, and centre in parks. It's clearly they're here. It's probably because it's warmer now. It's climate change, it's warmer, it's not so harsh. And these Nethusius pipistrelles, and there's one there, probably can adapt to it, and we're able to breed in this country now. It's not chilly enough for them anymore. They can live here. They do ring bats. You can ring them because you can put a little tag on its wing and it flies off. And they've ringed bats that they ringed in Latvia, and they found them in Kent. They've ringed bats in Sussex, found them in Poland. So bats clearly can travel quite long distances, because if you're flying across the channel, as long as you can have some insects on your way, you can keep going. You don't stop. So they're crossing. Never mind all the migrant issues across the channel at the moment. Bats have been doing it for years. Now, there's the other type of bats, the bigger bats. We have a group of bats called the nyctalids, and that tends to mean of the night, darker. They're bigger, noisier, and much warier. The biggest bat we've got in this country is called the noctule bat. It's the largest bat. It weighs up to 40 grams. So you compare that to a pipistrelle, which is up to 7 grams. These noctule bats are bigger. And they've got a wingspan of about 45 centimetres, which can be up to that. So they're quite big, chunky bats. They've also got other relative species called the serotine, Leisler, and natteras. And they're quite large and have quite broad wings, because they're big bats. They need to power themselves through the air. And so if you see a bat looking like that, and looks quite thuggish, doesn't it? That's a noctule bat, bigger bats. But the thing about them, whether you find them in Wandsworth Park is probably a moot point, because they're more of a woodland type bat. They tend to prefer areas with less artificial lighting, so therefore street lighting, park lighting, and they don't really like a lot of disturbance. They fly very high, so sometimes they come in really high, and then they will, in straight lines, and suddenly they'll swoop down and then fly back up again to a height. They don't like staying on the ground. They'll skim the tops of trees, hedges and woodland canopy, but they don't like coming down too long to the ground because they're a big creature. And of course, if you're big, the higher chance you're going to crash into something. Because you're a big thing, you're going to fly along and you might run into a lamppost or a tree. And of course, that could be catastrophic. So they're more elusive. So whether you get them in Wandsworth Park is probably erratic. It's not guaranteed, but they're bigger. So the best place to see them, Crystal Palace around Sydenham Hill Woods, Crystal Palace Ridge, very common there because the woodlands. Probably Tooting Beck Common as well, and also probably Streatham Common down in our part of Lambeth. They're more woodland type bats. But keep an eye out for them because they sometimes turn up without warning, but they'll only hang around and disappear again. Now, the one bat which everybody is always excited to try and see is what they call the Benton's bat. That's a species of bat which is known widely as the water bat. It's a medium-sized bat, so it's not very big, but it's very sensitive to light. It doesn't like light, so it can be elusive, and it's hard to detect in urban settings like parks. What's really attractive about them is they like water, and they've been known as the water bat or the canal bat for a very long time. And what they do is canals and ponds and rivers, they'll skim along the top surface, and they have these hairy feet, big hairy feet, and they'll literally drop them into the water, and they'll trawl through the water as they're going along, catching insects on the surface. Because as the insects that have been breeding in the water coming up to emerge to fly off, like mayfly and mosquitoes, they'll literally just snatch them off the water surface and then put them into the mouth and keep flying. Other bats will skim the water, but they're just flying along the surface trying to catch insects. They will never touch the surface of the water. But if you see a bat literally dragging its feet through the water, that's a Benton's. And this is a lovely picture taken by time lapse, and you can see the bat flitting around. And these marks are where the bat's been dragging in the water, catching insects. So it's quite an interesting picture. That's the Benton's when it's flying. And you can see it's quite a powerful bat targeting the insects on the water. Drops its feet, trawls, catches them into the mouth, flies on. Now, how many bats do you have in Wandsworth Park? Well, I've been doing some research. I did some surveys and some checking on the data. And over the past many years, in this area, not just Wandsworth Park, they've seen common soprano pipistrelle. They've seen nocturnal bats occasionally, serotines and liceless bats. These are the bigger bats. So they have been recorded on the data sets for Bat Conservation Trust. So at least 5 bat species, but there is potential for the occasionals like Benton's. So 5 for a public park is not bad because you've got a lot of lighting, you've got a lot of people, you've got a lot of noise. So to get 5 species of bats for a public park where it is pretty good. And you can do more to get more species, but that's a good start, isn't it? So where do your local bats live? Well, they're not obviously in this room with us, so where are they? Well, the thing about bats is they need somewhere safe and secure to fly back to so they can rest, sleep and breed. That's what's called roosts. So these are their homes, a bit like birds' nests. Bats can be solitary, they can live on their own, but a lot of species like to gather communally in these roosts. So they gather as a group, maybe a family group, maybe a group of associated bats, mixed bat species. And what's interesting is that bats use a mixture of what they call summer and winter roosts, as well as maternity roosts for rearing the young. So during the winter, they go to roosts where they can hibernate and sleep through the winter because it's too cold. And then in the summer, they have these roosts where all over the place, they could be anywhere. There could be 7 or 8, and they just hop between their summer roosts, picking off food as they go along. When they're breeding bats, the mothers move away into a special maternity roost where they chuck the males out because they don't want the males around, and they just bring their young up. So bats are quite versatile, summer, winter, and maternity roosts. So they've got lots of places they can live. Most bats can vary their creation and frequency through the year. So during the summer, lots of roosts. During the winter, one dedicated hibernation roost. And then when they're breeding, a maternity roost. Now, hibernation roosts are very, very special because, of course, the bats need to be protected from the winter, and they're very, very safe and secure. Summer roosts, they could be living in bat boxes, trees, anywhere. But in this winter, they're very careful where they put them. And those are the ones we protect greatest because we're the ones we don't want to be disturbed. Now, Where are bats living? Well, they were originally creatures of woodlands. We look in the past history of bats. Bats seem to have liked to live in dense woodlands with big trees with lots of holes in them. Um, and they're using the trees as a roost, flying around the tops and edges to find their food, because trees produce a lot of insects. You know, oak trees, ash trees, elm trees, lots of insects on lime trees as well. Those who've got cars will know about lime trees and their black droppings on your car. And that's because the aphids that are living on the lime tree are secreting all that honeydew that produces that black muck on your car. And the bats realize that lime trees are great for insects. Now, obviously, as woodland cover has decreased, and it has across the UK over thousands of years, the bats have adapted to just using buildings. They see the buildings that we live in as glorified trees. That's all they are. So they've just adapted to living in buildings. And they find the food they want in the streets and gardens, parks and allotments that live around the buildings. So they're coming into your houses, usually in the gaps between the tiles and your attics, your soffits, your eaves, your cavity walls, finding a gap, coming in, forming a roost, leaving it every day to go and find some food. So they're treating your houses like glorified trees. Interestingly, in Lambeth, we know 2 of our hospitals, major hospitals, A&E, have got bats living in them. We've got 3 police stations, 2 fire stations, 1 ambulance station, and we've also got, of course, we've got bats at Lambeth Palace, because you'd expect Lambeth Palace to have bats, because it's bound to have bats. Many churches have bats as well. So they're quite adaptable creatures, bats. Bats are found widely in houses and other buildings across the UK and London, although they can still use woodlands and trees if they've got suitable safe roosting features. So some of the bigger trees you find in parks and woodlands are probably quite attractive to bats. Big fissures, big gaps, big holes, they can sneak in, form a roost. But houses are doing the same thing. Bats aren't fussy about the age and the style of your building as long as they're warm, dry and safe. So there's an example where the bats are living in the top of the attic, forming a little roost colony, all staring at you, saying what you're looking at. But they will look for gaps and crevices in your walls, your roofs and lintels, and they squeeze into the void and cavity and then form a roost. And there's a bat leaving an old building, flying out to find food, treating the building like a big tree. The only way you're going to find out bats are living in your property is if there's a gap. The gap can be 2 centimetres wide, and the bats, they snuggle in, they kind of like wriggle in to get inside. And because they're hairy, they've got oil on their skins, and you find brown smears on the gap, and usually quite an oily smear, and also a strangely mousy smell. And that's the giveaway that bats are sneaking into your house. That's all you're going to do. So I'm not suggesting you climb up in your house tomorrow on a ladder, start looking at all the gaps in your house, but you'd be surprised that's probably how they're getting in. But you don't know they're there because they're very quiet and they keep themselves to themselves. So don't worry about it. They don't live with us. They don't want to come down in our rooms and hang around with us. They want to avoid us, but they still want to live with us because we provide them things they need. The bats have roosts in Wandsworth Park. This is the question you want to ask yourself. Are they living in the park? Well, some of the nice mature trees you've got, and you've got some fantastic trees in Wandsworth Park, and there's some quite splendid ones, might be suitable because if they've got gaps or fissures in them, and they've got ivy cover, the bats can get in behind the ivy and live inside the holes. But I think you're going to need a more comprehensive inspection to confirm this. And also you do what's called emergent surveys. And what you do is you stand around just at dusk and dawn, and you're watching the bats leaving and entering a tree. They're flying in, getting in, coming out. And that means you've got to stand there like price chickens at night, standing there watching bats coming in and out. And that's a proper survey you can do. And that's you confirming whether bats are using the trees or buildings. I'm safe to assume, unless you can prove that, they're probably living in the houses around the park. The problem with modern trees in parks is we tend not to want to have big holes in them or gaps because, of course, if the tree splits or shatters, comes down in the park, you've got a casualty or 2. And it could do massive damage to your fencing and to your gates. So a lot of tree parks and trees in parks are not managed to have large gaps and fissures in them because of the safety concerns. But if you go to some of the big older woodlands, there's probably lots of opportunities for bats. Pretty interesting, yeah. So that's great. Yeah, bats, if they fall on the ground, and they sometimes do, they just climb up the tree. They've got claws, up they come, back into where they want to be. Then they launch themselves off again and fly. So they're quite adaptable. Now, you've mentioned earlier about bat walks and how popular they are. So that's the opportunity, because bats are protected by law. You can't handle them, you can't touch them because they're protected by law. You need a license. So your chances are to look for them. And I'm not going to try and teach you to suck eggs, but basically bats, when you're looking for bats, they are not, are they creatures of night? Like in the Bela Lugosi vampire films? They are not. They are strictly what they call creatures of dusk and dawn, what's called crepuscular. They're going to come out at dusk and dawn. And the reason they're doing that is because that's the highest chances of catching up insect prey, and it's worthwhile flying to catch them. If they come out in the middle of the night, it's freezing cold and there's no insects. So they're wasting their time. And also flying is very energetic, it costs a lot of energy. So you're flying around wasting energy looking for food that you can't find. So the bats don't come out at 3 in the morning. They're coming out at dusk and dawn where it's still warm and there's still enough food to catch. And also the birds are gone to bed, so the bats have it to themselves. The best chance of seeing bats on the wing is just after full sunset, but it's still light enough to see things moving on the skyline. So that's your best chance to see bats in your garden or park. People who see them the first time see them as small, dark, jerky objects on the horizon, so little black ships flitting around, swoops and loops across your eye line. Birds tend to fly in straight lines and broad swoops, whereas bats are more erratic and jerky flight. So the basic things, how you tell a bat from a bird. But if you look at a bat in the dark or in dusk, you see black ships flitting around, you go, what kind of bat is it? Next slide, please. So again, just to recap, pipistrelles, if you see them, merge around sunset, and they're the bat people are most likely to spot in the first time in gardens, with that rapid, erratic flight, twisting and turning around the buildings, flying low down to catch their prey. That's the trick of the trade. See little things doing that, it's a pipistrelle. Next slide, please. Noctules, remember, big bat, early evening, just getting dark, flying around in a straight line, and then sometimes swooping down to catch food and then flying back up again very quickly. And you're more likely to see them over woodlands or dense canopies. So keep that in mind. Now, Benton's bat, the water bat, not easy to see. They like really relatively dark conditions, so they don't like much artificial light. It's unlikely they like unlit lakes, ponds, canals, and rivers, like, for instance, the River Wandle or Clapham Common or Wandsworth Common, where we have large ponds. They tend to like those kind of features. Your closest water body is the River Thames. And if you've seen the Thames on an average day or evening, that's what it looks like. Now, you imagine if you're a bat trying to find food in those conditions. It's very illuminated. You don't like light, that is not an attractive place to be. So, of course, the Benton's bats probably aren't seen on the River Thames. Your closest features are probably going to be things like Wandsworth Common or Tooting Beck Common or Clapham Common. It's probably too well lit and noisy for Bentons to use. So again, Bentons catching on the water, all that light just disturbs them and they don't catch food. So the River Thames isn't attractive. Although there's a campaign now to try and reduce the amount of lighting on the Thames, to try and reduce the amount of illumination, to make it better for wildlife, because not just bats, but birds. And there's a big program to try and adjust some of this lighting so it's more down lighting and it's a much softer lighting as well. It's called the Illuminated Thames. Listening for bats. People keep telling me the old story, blind as a bat. And it's not true. Bats are not blind. They have eyes, just like us, but their eyesight isn't very good at low levels of light. It's probably also black and white. So if you're trying to find food in the dark or at dusk, eyes don't really work. You're trying to catch these small, tiny objects that are at a distance from you. It's just not efficient. It's difficult to navigate and avoid hazards at low light levels. If you're ever in the park at night, trying to avoid trips and slips on the ground in low light is really hard, and the bats have the same problem. So they're trying to find food by using their eyes in dusk and dawn. It's really tricky. So what the bats do is use sound to navigate and find their food. Now, what bats are doing is they use a trick called echolocation. And what it means is they use a form of sonar where they send sine waves from their mouths and they hit targets and they bounce back to their ears, and they can then capture information and they can interpret it. So this bat here is clearly heading towards a tree, and the echolocation tells it it's approaching the tree, either catch an insect or turn to your left and right and avoid the tree. So they use it like sonar, echolocation. But the great thing about bats, and this is why people say to me, I'm in the garden, I see a bat flying by and I hear nothing, is because bats have gone ultrasonic. When they're echolocating, they don't use sounds we can hear. They emit high frequency calls well above our normal range of hearing. We can hear up to about 25 kilohertz hearing. Bats are well above that. Some children, very young kids, can actually hear high frequencies, and there are cases of children hearing bats communicating because their hearing is much better than adults. Our hearing range narrows as we get older, whereas children, very young children, have actually heard bats communicating inside buildings, and nobody believes them. It's typical of kids. The bats have modified their vocal cords, mouthparts in their noses, so they can produce ultrasonic frequencies. We can't, but bats can. They've adjusted everything so they can use ultrasound, and it radiates in a very directional manner. The thing about bats and ultrasound is you have to have the bats coming towards you to hear them, because if they're flying away from you, ultrasound is very directional. It doesn't scatter. So there's a bat using its bat sonar to find food. What we do, of course, and you've done this in the bat walks, is use bat detectors. Basically, they're special equipment that just converts ultrasound into sounds we can hear. That's all they do. They step it down, they drop the frequencies, usually by a factor of 10, so that we can then hear the sounds the bats are making. And this is a range of bat detectors. The ones that are coming out now are these things called sort of duets and various touch meters. And what they do is they plug into your mobile phone, and they act as a microphone, and you can actually see the bat sounds on your mobile phone. They're about £200. Price will come down. And on the left there is a bat detector, about £100 you can use for looking for bats. So they're just dropping the frequencies down, and that's what I bring out on my bat walks. Now, the other thing, of course, I mentioned before I finish, is about bat walks and bat talks is great to go out into a park and look for the bats. But the great thing is about we need to do more for bats to give them more homes. And we talked about it earlier about bat roosts and bat boxes. Boxes for bats are just simply artificial roosts. They're just trying to add to the number of roosts the bats have. They can be installed on the outside of a building on a tree. And there's some examples where they've been put on a building and put on a tree. And effectively what they are is slots. So the bats go inside and treat them like a artificial roost. They can be in wood, ceramic, even composites of wood and concrete. And they're very, very powerful. This is one which is called a Schwegler, which is concrete and wood. Very heavy, so you can't put them on any tree, because if they drop off, they'll hurt you. But they're incredibly warm, and the bats love them. But they take a while to get used to them. The one thing you must do is never put a bat box on the south-facing aspect of a tree or a building, because they'll get so hot in the summer, it'll boil the bats. So other directions. The other thing that's coming in now, and a lot of interest, and it's widely being used now, is not putting boxes on the buildings or trees, but putting them into the buildings. So these are special bricks which you can fit into the walls of buildings. And they've got openings on the outside so the bats can get in and out of the cavities. The attraction about them is that they're warm, they're secure, and they're clean. And they're basically integrated into the building. And this is a design for a bat box that's been put into a building. And here's an example of the bats actually living inside one of the slots of a bat brick. You've got to work with your developers to put them in when they start to do the building. And we've started to do a lot of conditions around developments where developers have to put bat boxes and bricks into their buildings. It's not expensive for developers. They've just got to have the mindset to do it. Next slide, please, Pat. Thank you. Bats are very conservative about their winter roosts. You think about bats, British bats are hibernating from about now until about March. They need to have somewhere really safe and secure to keep warm and dry during the winter, because it's going to get very cold and there's no food. So they look for places which they know are safe and secure. So they'll always go back to them if they can. If they get disturbed, next year they might decide to move somewhere else. but they're very conservative about their winter roost because it's their summer protection. If that roost is good, keep using it. And across London, there's lots of places like tunnels or railway tunnels, which are really attractive as winter roosts because they're underground, they're dry, they're warm. Bats love them. Some bats actually live inside bridges as well during the winter as well. Heaven knows how they put it with the noise, but they just switch off. They're asleep. They don't care how many lorries go over them. They're asleep. It's very variable. There are cases of bats where you can put trackers on them like little tags, and they can fly up to 5 kilometres a night. If they want to, they will fly 5 kilometres, even pipistrelles. They like to stay close to where their roosts are, where the food is, but if they have to travel, they will travel. Good food means you travel, just as you do. You'll travel to a nice restaurant. Bats will do the same. All our British bats hibernate because it's too cold. Mid-October till about mid-March. So right now, the bats who are still out are desperately hunting for food, get nice and fat and round, ready to hibernate. They'll survive through the winter and they just turn off their metabolism. They're literally just a beat every minute of their heart. Wake up in March, and it's usually because the temperature warms, and out they come and they start feeding like fury. Very rarely, they will sometimes if it's a nice warm day, but their problem is there's no insects. So if they come out and they go, no insects, come straight back in. They do need to feed because as soon as you start flying, you're burning energy all the time. I'm not suggesting you try and fly, but if you try and fly, you have to use a lot of energy. And you're burning up energy all the time. If you don't get enough food in, you'll starve and you'll collapse. So the bats have this balance between, do I get enough food to fly, or do I just stay quiet and wait? During the day, for instance, when they're not flying, they're just in deep sleep because there's no point in moving around your roost because there's no food. Usually about 8 to 9 degrees. But during the summer, when it gets chilly, they're still sleeping. But if it gets below about 9 degrees, the insect populations just drop off. And that's what tells them to go to sleep. There's no food. They're warm-blooded like us, but their balance is there anything to eat? No. So I go to sleep. No, they have to. They have when a bat lands by mistake, and they rarely ever do because they're very good flyers. If they ever do land by mistake, you watch them. They shuffle up to a tree or a branch, and they literally crawl up it very quickly, find a branch, and then they throw themselves off, and they start flying. They can't take off of the ground. If you see them on the ground and they're moving around the ground, there's a chance they're injured. And what you then do is you contact the Bat Conservation Trust, and they have bat helpers who will come out, collect the bat, and take it away to try and heal it. So if you see them shuffling around the ground all the time, it's more likely it's distressed. Bats are quite fast. I've seen them when they hit the ground by mistake and go, crikey, and then just literally shot up a tree and then launch themselves off. They're quite amazing at doing it. Most of it's for new developments, but there are retrofits where people are doing work to their houses. And we've got a housing association in Lambeth where they took out all the old ventilation systems and they put bat bricks in. Yeah. And they're not expensive at all. It's just the mindset for landowners and developers to do it. Yeah, it's all it is. It's that mindset, isn't it? It's like Swift bricks, the Swift boxes. It's having the mindset to do it. Yeah, yeah. I always say if you've got a mosquito problem in your garden, get a bat. 1,000 insects a night. If you've got mosquitoes biting you every night, try and encourage bats because it's a great way to keep the problem. Not spraying everywhere, just ask the bats to do it. They're great. It probably does because the Thames itself is tidal, and of course during the day you see those lovely shingle beds and flats, or those mud flats. There's probably insects everywhere. But the problem is it's the illumination. It's just too much light because the bats are getting all this light in their eyes and the boats going up and down as well. And I imagine if I was a bat flying on the surface of the water, there's so much distraction that it's probably hard to, and also the noise of the engines of boats and the cars. You probably get so much information coming into your ears, and that it's just complete clutter, and it's hard work. The bats probably just shoot off to the nearest canal or river and decide to feed there instead. Yeah. It's worrying. The current surveys show bat populations in London are quite stable. They haven't dropped dramatically. And that's partly because in London, like a lot of cities, we're doing a lot for wildlife about insects. You imagine all the wildflower meadows, the wetlands, not using pesticides, tree planting. So we're giving plenty of insects for a lot of animals in cities like London. We're doing quite well. My concern is what's happening out in the countryside. Intensive agriculture, lots and lots of chemicals being used. In cities and towns, insect populations are probably quite stable, and so bats are as well. But it's out in the countryside, which I think is a big concern. Probably do, actually. I'll tell you, one of the best places to get insects is compost heaps. Manure heaps and compost heaps. Now, if you've got any of them around a park where you've got loads of wood chippings and loads of mulch, the insects around there is huge, and the bats love them. So you want to get bats in the park, get a huge pile of wood chippings, and just watch as the bats hang around. Yeah, mainly, yes, summer roosts. Bats don't tend to use bat boxes and like that in the winter. They're too cold. The chance of getting a frost is too high. They want to go in somewhere secure. But all those boxes are just summer roosts. But the thing is, you put them up and you take your chances. The bats might use them this year, they might use them next year. But all you're doing is you're offering them a chance. We will do. Not yet, no. There's about 40, 39 species of bats in Europe. We've got 18. Is it going to be a more of a balance coming towards us? More likely, because if we get warmer, the bats think this is great. Our problem is we're still going to get cold winters. So maybe some bats will say it's just too cold because they don't like our cold temperatures. We're on the very edge of the bat populations. You get very few bats in Scotland because it's just too cold for them. Extremely accurate.
Really?
Yeah.
So if it tells you all the different types that are found in the park, it's likely accurate.
Yep, very accurate indeed. Because on a phone, you can download it and send it to people. They're about £200 to buy. You plug them into your phone, and they're very good. They're very good. But again, it's the expense. The revolution will be in a few years' time when our mobile phones have microphones that are ultrasound sensitive. Then we can just have a phone and we just have an app. And that's going to come because phone technology is evolving so rapidly. And then for your children and grandchildren, it's adorable. They just get the mobile phone out and go click. Probably a bit too low for them. But what the attraction is, the insects coming off the leaves will go up in the air and the bats will probably get some. Probably not going to come and supply everything the bats want at that level. But as the insects come up through the tree, yeah, bats will take a few. It's probably also good for birds as well. So it's not about, it's about having epicomic growth where it's appropriate. It's not about having every tree with it. It's about a selection. I think it's the balance. Yeah. Get most of their water from their food. Imagine insects are like us, are 70% water. So if they have enough insects in night, they get plenty of water. But they will drink water if they're thirsty. They'll skim a top of a water body and they'll just take a little sip. And sometimes you see bats with a little drop of water on the end of a leaf. They'll go past it and just grab the water droplet and fly on. 0 degrees. Yeah. They literally, what happens is they shut everything down and their body temperature can be down to almost 0 degrees. And their heart is beating about 1 beat per minute, but they're still alive. It's an incredible thing to do. And this is probably just something which our ancestors, mammals, did it as well, but we've lost the ability to do it. They still got it. It's saving energy. It's purely that. In the tropics, very few bats hibernate because there's no point. It's warm enough. No, because sparrowhawks and peregrines are sighted hunters, they're normally not active at the time the bats are active. The one predator that bats don't like are owls, because owls come out in night, don't they? Owls hunt small mammals, but if you're an owl flying along and you see a bat flying past, you might as well say, it's a meal. Yeah. And of course, as we know, owl populations in London have increased in some parts because they're called tawny owls like nice wooded parks. Apparently, bats don't taste very nice. They taste disgusting. I've never tried one, but apparently they do taste almost like rotten mice, apparently. So you imagine the average bird probably goes, this is disgusting, I'll go and get something else instead. Which is why cats, when cats catch bats, which they sometimes do, because cats are a bit daft, they'll catch them and they just leave them because apparently they taste vile. If you live on insects all your life, you probably do taste like that.
That was great. Thank you very much.